That filter hanging over your stove right now, the one you can't see through anymore, the one that's basically turned into a black sheet of hardened grease, you don't need to throw that out. I know it looks like garbage. I know your first instinct is to order a replacement online and wait 3 days for it to show up. Don't. 90% of the time, that filter is completely salvageable, and I'm going to show you exactly why it got that bad in the first place, and how to bring it back to bare metal without buying a single thing you don't already have under your sink. Here's what actually happens with these filters, and it's not what most people think. You cook, steam rises, grease particles ride that steam straight up into the hood, and the mesh filter catches them. That's its whole job. One layer at a time, that grease sits down on the metal. Fry some bacon on a Tuesday, that's one layer. Sear a steak on Friday, that's another. Do this for 8 months, a year, 3 years, and you're not looking at a dirty filter anymore. You're looking at a filter that's wearing a jacket of solid fat, sometimes a 1/4 inch thick in the corners where the airflow is weakest. Most people don't notice this happening because it's slow. It's not like a spill on the floor that you see and clean right away. This builds up so gradually that your eye adjusts to it. You look at that hood every single day and your brain just stops registering the color change. I've walked into commercial kitchens where the manager swears the hood was cleaned recently, and I pulled a filter and it hasn't seen soap in over a year. Nobody's lying to me. They just stopped seeing it. And here's the part that actually matters, the part that turns this from an annoyance into a real problem. Once that grease layer gets thick enough, it does 2 things. First, it kills your airflow. Your range hood motor is working the same as always, but the air can't push through a 1/4 inch of solidified fat. So all that smoke and steam and odor you're trying to pull out of your kitchen just hangs there instead. Second, and this is the one that should actually worry you, grease is fuel. A clogged filter sitting 3 feet above an open flame or a hot burner is one of the most common causes of kitchen fires nobody talks about. Restaurant kitchens get shut down over this constantly. Home kitchens just don't have an inspector checking, so it goes unnoticed until something goes wrong. By the time most homeowners decide to deal with it, the filter looks unsalvageable, sticky, dark brown or black, sometimes with a texture almost like tar. That's the moment people give up and go buy new. And that's exactly the moment I'm telling you to stop and try one more thing first. But there's one step people always skip before they even get to cleaning it, and it's the one that determines whether this works or not. Grease buildup isn't random, and it's not really about how much you cook either. It's about heat and time. When fat hits high heat, it doesn't just float up as grease, it partially breaks down. Some of it stays as liquid fat, some of it oxidizes in the air on the way up to your hood. Oxidized fat is stickier and harder than fresh fat. That's the same chemistry behind why a cast iron pan gets that black, slightly tacky coating if you keep re-oiling it and heating it without properly cleaning between uses. It's called polymerization, and it's the exact same process happening on your filter mesh, just slower and messier because it's mixed with dust, steam residue, and whatever else is floating in your kitchen air. I've pulled apart hundreds of these filters over the years, some from home kitchens, some from full restaurant lines, and the pattern is always the same. The grease closest to the burner, usually the front third or center of the filter, is thicker and older, almost varnished. The grease near the edges is thinner because there's less direct heat and airflow reaching it. That's not a coincidence, that's just physics. Heat rises straight up before it spreads, so whatever's directly above your main cooking zone takes the worst of it. The other thing nobody thinks about, your filter isn't just catching grease from big cooking sessions. It's catching grease from everything. Toast with butter, a pan of eggs, reheating leftovers. Every single time heat and fat are in the same room, a tiny bit goes airborne, and your filter is the thing standing between that grease and your ceiling. People assume it's just the big greasy meals that do the damage. It's actually the accumulation of hundreds of small ones that gets you.
And once that first layer sets, it acts like a primer coat. Grease sticks to grease far easier than it sticks to bare metal, so the buildup doesn't happen in a straight line, it accelerates. The first 6 months might barely be noticeable. The next 6 months, it doubles. That's why so many people go from, it looks a little dirty, to, how did this get so bad? Seemingly overnight. It didn't happen overnight, it just crossed a threshold you weren't watching for. Now, here's where people start making things worse, not better, and I see this constantly. Mistake 1, scrubbing it dry or scrubbing it with something abrasive. I understand the instinct. You see caked on grease, your brain says, scrub harder. But a stiff wire brush or steel wool on a mesh filter does two things wrong. It bends and warps the mesh, which ruins the airflow pattern the filter was designed for, and it can strip the coating on aluminum filters, which actually makes them corrode faster afterward. I've seen filters that looked cleaner after a hard scrub, but were functionally worse. Bent mesh doesn't sit flush in the frame anymore, so grease-laden air just slips around the gaps instead of through the filter. Mistake 2, using hot water alone and calling it done. Hot water softens grease, sure, but it doesn't break it down. Grease is not water-soluble. That's basic kitchen chemistry. The same reason you don't wash a greasy pan with just water and expect it to come clean. People run their filter under the hottest tap water they've got, wipe it with a rag, and it looks better for about a day. Then the grease that was never actually removed, just moved around and remelted, resettles into the mesh once it cools back down. You need something that actually cuts the grease at a molecular level, not just something hot enough to make it temporarily runny. Mistake 3, soaking it in plain dish soap and walking away for 5 minutes. Dish soap works, that's not the mistake. The mistake is the time and concentration. A quick 5-minute dunk with a squirt of dish soap barely touches years of hardened, oxidized grease. That stuff needs sustained contact time and heat to actually break apart. People try the quick version, see it didn't work, and conclude the filter is a lost cause. It's not a lost cause, it just needed the process done properly, not rushed. There's actually a fourth one I'll mention quickly because I see it a lot with people who've watched too many life hack videos. Pouring straight bleach on it. Don't. Bleach doesn't break down grease the way degreasers do. It just bleaches the color so it looks cleaner, while the greasy film is often still sitting right there underneath. And mixing bleach with certain other cleaning products in an enclosed kitchen is genuinely dangerous. Skip it entirely. Here's the part almost nobody gets right, though, even the people who do everything else correctly. This is the method I've used on filters that looked completely beyond saving. The black, tar-like, how is this even still called a filter kind? It works because it addresses the actual chemistry of what you're dealing with, not just the surface mess. Stage 1, the boiling degrease bath. Get a pot or a container big enough to fully submerge the filter. A large stock pot works, or if you've got a sink you can plug and it's deep enough, that's even better because you can do the whole filter at once without bending it. Fill it with water and bring it close to a boil. Not a rolling boil, just below it. Somewhere around 190 to 200 degrees Fahrenheit, if you want to be precise about it. Add a generous amount of degreaser. This is the step people underestimate. You want something with real grease-cutting power, a heavy-duty degreaser, or a strong dish soap concentrate. And honestly, baking soda helps too, about a half cup per gallon of water, because it raises the pH of the water, and grease breaks down faster in an alkaline solution. That's not a trick I picked up online. That's something my grandfather taught me on restaurant range heads 30-some years ago, and it still holds up because the chemistry hasn't changed. Submerge the filter completely. Let it sit for at least 20 to 30 minutes. For filters with years of buildup, I'll go a full hour, sometimes longer, checking every 15 minutes or so. Pro tip, don't just let it sit still in the water. Every 10 minutes, agitate it, lift it slightly and let it drop back in, or use tongs to shift it around. That movement disrupts the softened grease layer and lets fresh hot water get to what's underneath it. A filter that just sits motionless in a pot cleans slower than one you're gently working because the water right against the grease cools and saturates faster than you think. Stage 2, the scrub. Done right. Once the grease has softened, and you'll know because it starts to look glossy and slide rather than sit stiff, pull the filter out carefully. This is where a lot of that grease will just start sliding off on its own into the water. That's a good sign. Now scrub, but with the right tool. A stiff nylon brush, not metal, not steel wool. Nylon has enough bite to physically lift softened grease off the mesh without bending the metal or scratching a protective coating. Work in the direction of the mesh pattern, not against it. This matters more than people think, because scrubbing against the grain of a woven mesh filter can actually push debris deeper into the weave instead of pulling it out. Focus extra time on the center section. Remember what we talked about earlier? That's where the buildup is always thickest because that's where the direct heat hits hardest. Stage 3. Second bath if needed. For filters with genuinely years of buildup, one bath isn't usually enough, and that's fine. Don't force it in one pass. Refill your pot or basin with fresh hot water and degreaser, submerge it again for another 20 minutes, and repeat the scrub. I've worked on filters that needed 3 full cycles before they came back to bare, shiny metal. That's normal for something that's been ignored for a long stretch. Rushing this step is exactly how people end up with a filter that looks good enough, but is still holding on to grease deep in the weave, which means it starts looking dirty again within weeks instead of months.
Stage 4. Rinse and full dry. Rinse thoroughly under hot running water until the water coming off it runs clear. No cloudiness, no greasy sheen on the surface. This part matters. Any leftover degreaser residue can actually attract dust and grime faster once the filter's back in place, which defeats the whole purpose. Dry it completely before reinstalling. I mean completely, not just wiped down, actually air-dried or towel-dried until there's 0 moisture left, especially if it's an aluminum filter, because trapped moisture against aluminum is exactly what starts corrosion and pitting. Set it on a towel, prop it up so air moves through the mesh, and give it a couple hours if you can. Pro tip? If you've got access to it, a hairdryer on a cool or low setting aimed through the mesh will clear out any water sitting in the weave in about 5 minutes, way faster than air drying alone, and it won't heat the metal enough to cause any warping. Stage 5. Reinstall and reset your schedule. Slide it back into the hood. Make sure it's seated flush. A filter that's sitting even slightly crooked lets unfiltered air bypass it entirely, which brings you right back to square one. And this is the step that actually prevents you from ending up back here in another 2 years staring at the same black filter wondering where the time went. Set a real schedule. Light home cooking, once every 2 to 3 months. Heavy cooking, frying regularly, cooking for a big family, once a month. Commercial kitchens do this weekly for a reason. The filter doesn't get to that beyond saving black tar state overnight. It happens because months and months of small buildup went unchecked. A quick maintenance clean takes 10 minutes. What we just walked through when it's been years can take over an hour. The math on that is pretty simple. That's the piece almost everyone skips, by the way. Not the cleaning itself, but actually going back and setting a reminder so you're not back here in another 3 years staring at the same black filter wondering where the time went. A note on when to actually replace it. I want to be straight with you here, because I'm not telling you every filter is savable. If the mesh itself is torn, badly warped, rusted through with actual holes in the metal, or the frame is cracked, no amount of degreasing brings that back. Structural damage is different from buildup. Buildup is a cleaning problem. A torn or rusted out filter is a safety problem, and that's the one case where I tell people to just replace it. But that's maybe 1 filter out of every 10 I come across. The other 9 are sitting in someone's kitchen right now looking like garbage when they're really just one good soak away from working exactly like they did the day they were installed. That's the method. Start to finish, no shortcuts, nothing that requires you to buy specialty products you can't already find under your sink or at the hardware store down the street. If you try this and it brings your filter back, I want to hear about it. Drop a comment and tell me how bad yours was before you started. I read every one of them. While you're at it, subscribe if you want more of this. Real fixes, not the internet shortcuts that half work and leave you right back where you started in a month.
And if grease buildup on your filter has you wondering what's actually built up inside the hood itself, behind the filter, in the ductwork you can't see, go watch the video I did on deep cleaning a range hood's interior. That's usually the next thing people find once they finally get their filter looking new again, and it's often worse than the filter ever was.